how to have that difficult conversation.
It's super difficult about sexually transmitted diseases, otherwise known as sexually transmitted infections.
You know what? I don't even think we can talk about it.
I know, it's so taboo.
I know. You know, James and I were discussing, people can talk about their health issues all day long, their their flus, their intestinal disorders.
Colds, whatever, our ailments, right?
Yeah, constantly. But then all of a sudden you say, oh, you know, I was exposed once to, you know, XYZ down below. You can't even say what it is.
Right.
And it's like...
There's so much taboo and stigma around our sexual anatomy and genitals and their health and well-being.
Yeah.
Just like kind of mental health stigma, right?
Yep. You know, you can't say, oh, you know, I might be a little anxious. No, you're depressed, but it's okay. Like, there's just... So we sort of wanted to have a conversation on how to have a conversation.
Right, how to talk to sexual partners about your sexual health, well-being, your risk aversiveness to particular safer sex practices, because it can be so, nobody teaches this, right?
No, and then there's also a big stigma, and you know, again, we work with couples all the time, and we're working with individuals, and you know, a lot of times these topics, I don't know how to tell my partner, or I just found out that my partner did blah, 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 or maybe we've been in a scenario and someone says that. First of all, even if your instinct is to run for the hills because you just have a lack of education, or you've just been sitting in fear due to lack of information for so long, it's okay. Take a few breaths.
Right. Sometimes it's about getting to know ourselves and our own reactions to things. Why do we believe what we believe, right? Are we more concerned about a sexually transmitted infection than some other kind of infection in our lives? And if so, is there any kind of remaining sex negativity, maybe some slut shaming? Just get to know why we tick so that we can sort of respond instead of react to situations.
The majority of your sexually transmitted infections, diseases, are not going to kill you.
Right.
They may annoy the living hell out of you.
Might have to take medication and treat it when it pops up, if it pops up.
But the majority of the diseases that you could possibly get exposed to are not going to kill you. They're just a nuisance, like a cold is a nuisance.
Right.
That being said, how you bring up the discussion, we'd like to talk about a few different scenarios, because sometimes these things are chronic for people. Sometimes you were recently exposed. Other times you're with a new partner, and you know, how do you bring up the conversation? And so James and I, you know, wanted to give you a few thoughts or ideas to do this in a way that's just not so demonizing and fearful.
Yeah. So first case scenario, if you've realized you've been diagnosed with sort of a chronic STI, whether you have breakouts or indications of that infection or not, because not everybody does, let's talk about that scenario first, right? Where you're like with someone new that doesn't know about your status.
Well, I was told a story. I was out on a date, and I was asking, I always ask my dates about, or I did when I was going out on lots of dates, you know, what their dating history was like. And, you know, this one guy was saying, that he knew this girl, and she had been exposed to the herpes virus when she was real young, and you know, she wanted to let him know, and it was the first time they were going to have an intimate moment. He said, you know, I felt real bad, but I was like, oh no, I can't do this, and left. And I thought, well, but she was being honest with you, so all you had to do was ask her two questions. One, oh, I'm so sorry that you had that experience, because A, imagine how traumatizing that must have been for her.
Yeah.
And so you ask, oh, I'm so sorry. The next question would be, you know, are you on medication? When's the last time you had an outbreak? And I guess you're okay with using protected sex, assuming she hasn't said so. Those were all three different scenarios that could have occurred instead of him just completely rejecting this girl.
Right.
And when I called him on it, he said, oh, well, you know, what was his excuse? Oh, it was only like a third date anyway. And I was like, that...
About just being a compassionate human being towards another person on the planet, right?
And let me tell you what that type of thing does is now that girl who just got rejected, I'm sure that's happened to her a lot, again, not my client, But I just felt so bad for her, and I could understand his fear as well. But why is she going to want to be honest with people? Because she deserves love too. What's going to motivate her to be honest if she's always being shot down?
Right. So again, to recognize that having this conversation, it doesn't mean that you have to be with someone that you feel uncomfortable with based on their STI status.
No.
This isn't about forcing anyone to do something that feels uncomfortable. What we're recommending is that you be compassionate, that you empathize with yourself and with the other person, right? So leading from a place of like, I'm so glad that you told me, or I want to tell you something that you may, that's part of our potential sexual chemistry and connection here. To lead from a place that's not like, oh my gosh, I have this secret thing to tell you and it's horrible and awful, because you're leading from a place that's going to probably predict the outcome. It's about recognizing, hey, I am, as part of my personal integrity and sexual ethics, I like to talk about these things beforehand in advance. I'm saying it in a more clinical way because I'm a therapist, but use words that feel comfortable for you, right? To have that, to broach that conversation so that you both feel more comfortable and aware of the chemistry and what you can and don't want to do.
And as a chronic sufferer, whether you've had outbreaks or not, do you feel that that's information that's worthy to your new partner if you're practicing safe sex, right? Meaning, if you're someone like this poor gal who attracted this on her first sexual experience, and she hasn't had an outbreak in 20 years, and she's just perpetually on Valtrex, which is a suppressant, and she uses condoms in safe sex, is this something that her partner needs to know?
Well,
at that moment.
I hear you. Yeah, and those are all decisions that it requires some level of internal investigation and looking at your own sort of personal ethics and what makes sense to you and evaluating the risk factors involved and all those kinds of things. The one thing I want to, me with words, right? I just want to acknowledge that there is no one way to have safe sex. That's why I prefer using the word safer, because we all have different levels of risk aversiveness as it comes to this topic, right?
Correct.
So to honor what's true for us, wherever we're at, even if intellectually we think otherwise, but emotionally we can only be with someone sexually in a particular way, right? This is about recognizing, what levels of risk we're willing to take in relationship, with whom, in what context, because that's going to be different for everyone. There's not one right way and one wrong way here.
And I would say to remember that, again, especially if you're a chronic sufferer, remember that you're in a we scenario, right? So this is not just about you taking care of your own health, but if you were exposed to something that left you with a lifetime issue, whether it was contagious or not, just to remember that whatever choice you do make in terms of how you want to have this discussion, that you're dealing with your health and the partner you're choosing to be with. Or partners, and vice versa, right? It's not like you're responsible for everybody and they're not. So just remember that as soon as you step out of being singledom and you decide to interact with one or more partners, that you're now having a shared responsibility in each other's sexual health. And that's an important thing to remember. Yeah. It's not just about you anymore.
Right. We got to consider other people in our lives and our impact. So, part of this also, let's switch scenarios.
Yeah, to if you're...
So let's say that you just found out, you were just recently tested, found out that you have a particular STI, whether it's chronic or not, and you've had recent sexual partners, how to have that conversation, right? Thankfully, there's a lot of, in certain cities and demographics, there are even apps and internet sort of resources that allows you to put in someone's email or phone number and that it sends that notification anonymously if you choose to do so. These are all various different options. Or you can decide to have this sort of information sharing with the other person.
Nothing. I was just having I'm having some thought moments, but it's okay.
Thoughts?
I was just going through gestures. No, it's fine. Well, one of the thoughts that I was thinking is there's always this sense of panic, right? So you find out that you've been recently exposed. There's a sense of, and I guess in a less complex level, it's sort of, I don't want to get that cold. I can't believe I got that cold, and da da da. There's this sense of panic when you've discovered that maybe you've been exposed to an STI. Two reasons. One is you probably feel betrayed because somebody lied to you.
Or they didn't know and just found out.
Yes, right? Yes. And that, oh no, your life is ruined, right? And then you take that panic and you start throwing it out on everyone. And I would also suggest take a few breaths. It is not the end of the world. It's annoying. It's not the best news on the planet. You certainly don't need to, and nor should you celebrate it. But there's a place, I think, between sheer panic and thinking that your life has ended and your sexual life has ended, and then, wow, that person was such an asshole, or wow, I can't believe that maybe they don't know.
Well, and to not fan the flames, right? So if you're in this state of being, probably not the best time to go looking for pictures or resources or hear other people read the comment section of articles related to.
Don't jump on WebMD just yet.
Right?
Take a few breaths.
Information and getting
That's
it
new
and understanding.
And scary.
Sometimes it can be useful. With more information, we understand it better, and sometimes it can just intensify our own sort of reactions, right? So be careful.
Take a few breaths, take a break when you've been recently exposed, then just organize things, right? But wait till you're out of that stage of panic.
Right.
The other scenario would be...
before we do the other scenario,
what
I just want to recognize, too, that if someone's broaching this conversation with you, or you're broaching this conversation with them, regardless of the setting, to me, it shows a certain... skill set, a relational skill set, a sensitivity, a compassion, a caring. And so if you can take it in that way, if you can have this conversation with that intent, I value myself and my own health and well-being, I value someone else and their health and well-being, and that's where it's coming from. It doesn't have to come from a place of like, I'm shamed and I'm bad and I'm
accusatory.
Or accusatory, right? It can be recognizing, like, thank you for talking to me about this. Thank you for bringing this up. Right. It's having an adult conversation.
And allowing yourself to be upset. As I said, take that space. You're going to be upset. If this is your scenario and you're recently exposed, you're allowed to be upset. You should be upset. No one's telling you not to be upset. We're just suggesting take a few breaths and wait till your thinking cap comes back on, right? Your end of life is not anywhere near.
Right.
So third scenario that could occur is that your first time you're going to be intimate with a partner or partners.
Thank you, honey.
And you want to have a conversation about, what your values are as it pertains to your sexual safety. Do you like to use condoms? Do you get pushed into if they don't have it? IUDs, birth control.
Yeah, do you want to wait to have fluid bonding?
So people get tested.
Condomless sex until you get tested? Do you only use condoms in certain situations and not others? For a lot of people, they'll have it with anal or vaginal sex, but not with oral sex. But again, all this stuff can vary, right? So it's about recognizing your own risk aversiveness, your own comfort level, whatever it is in the moment, even if you think it should be different. And having that kind of conversation.
Now, sometimes if, alcohol's involved, or pot, or other sort of
other substances,
your boundaries that are there when your headspace is a little clearer can get a little bit blurry. Maybe you do things you wouldn't have done. And I would just say be careful on those first few experiences. If you're in the scenario where you want to have that, here's what I do for safe sex conversation, careful how much booze and substances you use, because it's going to...
That first conversation you might want to have without it, and before you're naked and wanting to do things, sometimes it's helpful to sort of slow it down or step back and go, oh, let's talk about this first before we do anything, because then we can have a more fun time and know where we stand.
Exactly. And don't allow people to bully you into their view if it doesn't match yours. And don't let passion, with or without substances, take the reins of the decisions that you have said, this is what makes me feel safe. You need to stand by those. Right.
So there's another scenario, which is where someone says that they'll do something, wear a condom, use an IUD, be on the pill, but they actually are lying to you or deceiving you or taking the condom off or the IUD or not taking the pill, those kinds of things. And you find that out after the fact, right? You don't realize it as it's happening. And it's important to be able to have these conversations where you're like, hey, look, I found this, I discovered this, and I'm not okay with that. That's not what I signed up for. I did not consent to that, right? That you get to express that, you get to set limits, you get to walk away.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody gets to violate you, and that is a violation, by the way.
Yeah.
When you blatantly lie, stealthing, right? You're having protected sex, you think it's protected. In the middle of it,
off a condom
someone just takes
and
the condom off
continues to
and
go.
continues, and
Without your consent.
right, and things have gotten really heavy, and you don't find out till afterwards. Those are violating, and they're not okay. No. So if you find out that that's your scenario and that you might have been exposed to something, those are going to be complex feelings that may even require a therapist or a life coach to also help you with some of that.
Right. So part of safer sex practices can also be getting tested if you have more than one partner, or your one partner has more than one partner, you. They often recommend every 3 to 6 months to get tested for STIs and HIV. To boost your immune system, to take antiviral medication or HIV medication or those kinds of things, right? To be in good health.
Yep.
So that you can more fully enjoy the experience of being with another and be less likely to transmit for certain viruses.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we understand these conversations aren't easy, which is why we're doing this topic today. How to have these difficult conversations. James and I use humor a lot and empathy in our practice when we're working with couples, when we're working with individuals. Obviously, STIs, there's not much that's very funny about it, but you can keep a lightheartedness in how you talk about it. You can integrate it. And so if we were to leave you with just some 4 tips, assess what your own safer sex practice is, right? And you can integrate that into your flirting and be having a really great date and just being like, hey, do you have a condom? And someone once said to me, oh, no, but don't worry, or something, I'll pull out. And I was just like, oh, that's so funny. Do you have a condom?
Right.
Right. And I said it just like that with like a smile. I didn't get me like, oh, I can't believe you'd say that to me.
You just repeat.
Yeah, I just repeated what I said with a little smile and cute and let him know how attractive I was, attracted I was to him. But I reinforced what my standard was at that time. Right?
Which is our second point, which is to communicate your partner what your comfort level and what your needs are. So let's say that you find out from your partner, sex partner, or partners that they do have a chronic STI that you don't have, that you'd rather not get. There's lots of sexual things that you can still do with them, right? So part of communicating is figuring out, are there ways to still be, sexual with each other, to be affectionate, to have pleasure, while not being at risk or less risk for contracting a particular STI?
Exactly. So assess what your safer sex practice is, be able to communicate that in a kind and loving way, be willing to say no and set boundaries. Again, watch the substances because that can make boundaries a little bit loosey-goosey, but you need to be willing to walk away if those first 2 needs aren't met.
Yeah, if someone continually pushes and pushes and pushes to do a particular sexual act or activity that you don't feel comfortable with, that can be a sign that they're not respecting where you're at, who you are, and your own comfort level. So that can be one of those make it or break it scenarios that you may decide you need to walk away from.
And then, as James had already mentioned, get regular checkups, especially if you're with more than one person.
Yeah.
Get those checkups regularly. So we hope that this helps you. We know that these are not easy conversations to have. That's why the episode wasn't titled How to Have Easy Conversations about STIs or STDs. But we can certainly find ways to make it a little less difficult. Everybody's needs get met. And remember, it's no longer about you when you decide to become sexually active with someone else. And you have to start thinking in terms of each other and each other's health and pleasure.
Yes, so let's obliterate stigma as it relates to STIs and increase compassion, understanding, and communication.
Yep. If you want to see more of us, www.thejamesandheathershow.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
And you can also call us with your questions, comments, topics you'd like us to address. We'd love to hear from you.